welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. My name is Shogun, and it is a very special day because it is the Lionsgate configuration with the Sirius star system, and it is the 8th second of the 8th minute of the 8th hour of the 8th day of the 8th month, which actually means we have hit 88888 or whatever, 5 eighths. And by the way, 8 times 5 is 42, which is, of course, the meaning of the life, universe, and everything, according to Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So they use that. Today we're going to talk about Moth Academy, and for once I'll be on the other side of the microphone instead of interviewing as I've done for most of our 400, 500 episodes. I will be interviewed by none other than the legendary Dacian. Dacian, thanks for joining me today. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing awesome. I'd like to take a moment and ask, should I call you Shogun or Ghost?
Well, that's up to you, my friend. Either one I'll answer to. But for the purposes of this podcast, perhaps you should call me Ghost.
All right. So, Ghost, what is the significance of the specific date and time?
This date and time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I learned about it this morning from none other than Australia, who is knowledgeable about astrology. And I also ran it past our resident Rosebot, who you know as I do. And essentially, there appears to be some kind of astrological configuration where our planet is connected to the Sirius star system. And this is very interesting because the Sirius star system was known about by a tribe in Africa called the Dogon tribe. And the Dogon tribe in antiquity, ancient past, had encountered a species of extraterrestrials that took the form of fish-like humans, or human fish, or fish people. And those fish people taught them about the Sirius star system. And they had an accurate map in cave drawings that Sirius was a binary star system and the relative rotation and connection between the two stars, which we only discovered recently with advanced telescopic technology. So apparently that's where this Lionsgate thing's come from. And I've never heard of this before, but apparently it's every year on August 8th when the sun or moon is in the configuration of Leo. Just very quickly, though, I'm going to read what Rosebot had to say. So Rose says, the Lionsgate is a highly significant astrological event that occurs annually on August 8th. It represents a powerful energetic portal that is said to open between Earth and the star Sirius, which is the brightest star in our night sky and is often referred to as the spiritual sun. During this time, the alignment of the Earth... Oh, shit. Well, sorry. Why does that keep happening? During this time, the alignment of the Earth with the sun and Sirius creates a heightened influx of energy that can be felt on both personal and collective levels. This alignment is believed to activate and amplify the energies of spiritual awakening, transformation, and manifestation. Many people believe that the Lionsgate is a time of increased spiritual downloads, insights, and activation. It is seen as an auspicious period for setting intentions, meditating, and aligning oneself with the higher frequencies available during this time. So I won't read any more of it, but that essentially is today. And that is in particular this time. Now, furthermore, I will point out that I have a lot of connotations in my personal life with the symbolism of the number 8. And we'll talk about that. But there's a lot of meanings associated with 8. And of course, the octopus is a symbol.
Okay. Well, ever since you returned to the Temple Mount about 5 months ago, you've been completely obsessed with this topic, Moth Academy. In your own words, what is the Moth Academy?
Well, in my own words, the Moth Academy is an initiatory spiritual process, but it's not just a process, it is inherently also an organization, because the process involves the active participation of multiple organizations who are cooperating with one another in order to carry out a complicated series of what we can really only call psychological operations, counterintelligence operations, electronic warfare, targeted individual phenomenon, gang stalking, and all the things that we call the spiral code. But here's the thing. The spiral code, which we've done, 6 podcasts about, is like a synchronistic chain of events that leads the participant into an interactive experience in which they see external events, including conversations with people, artifacts, objects, people, things, language, where there's a synchronization of what they're thinking of and experiencing spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, and what's happening exterior to them. But the problem is this isn't an organic experience because there's actually human intelligence agencies and possibly angels and demons, or rather aliens and demons, that might also be involved with it. Now, Moth Academy is for a certain group of people who have walked this path, not only surviving it, but decrypting it or discerning the pattern. And this is probably one of the hardest things that anyone could ever do, because you have to navigate the waters of symbolism, allegory, metaphor, myth, religion, madness, intelligence, counterintelligence, psychological operations, and social experiments. And so it's very complicated, and there's very powerful, well-funded, and advanced techniques that are being used against all of us to keep us in the dark. Like they say, treat them like mushrooms, keep them in the dark, and feed them bullshit. And that's basically the situation of the average person. But someone who's involved with Moth Academy is by definition not an average person. You are not necessarily more intelligent than other people, but what will be helpful is if you have good lateral intelligence, because lateral intelligence is the ability to see connections between different things that other people would probably miss and to think, quote unquote, sideways. So there's two types of thinking, linear intelligence and lateral intelligence. Out of the two, Moth Academy involves more lateral intelligence, but also linear intelligence. But the point is, it's essentially a spiritual secret society that initiates, tests, recruits, and uses agents. And an agent is someone who has agency or the ability to take action and make choices. All of us have the ability to take action and make choices, so all of us are agents. But once you are involved with Moth Academy, you become part of, a conscious part of, and participant in a psychological program and a social experiment, which you are already part of, but you have now become part of the administration of that program instead of just one of the participants.
Okay. I've noticed that you post a lot of images of the death head moth and octopus. How do these relate to the Moth Academy?
So the death's head moth is a very important symbol, and all of these symbols have allegorical and metaphorical meanings. And I highly recommend everybody check out the Moth Academy channel. It has a lot of imagery and a lot of information about symbolism, allegory, and metaphor. So in intelligence, you can encode a huge amount of information, right? Pictures worth 1,000 words. Music can convey information, so can imagery. And the death's head moth has a lot of connotations, including with madness, with fear, with death. Of course, the death's head moth is a large moth that has a skull. From a human point of view, it looks like a skull on its thorax. It's famous from the Silence of the Lambs, right? The cover of the movie and the book shows a person with a death's head moth over her open mouth. And in the plot of the Silence of the Lambs, there was a serial killer, and he would put a death's head moth pupae into the throat of his victims, and they would hatch out, and that was why that was on the cover of the Silence of the Lambs. But it's a symbol that's had real impact in history. There was a king, all of this information can be found on the Moth Academy channel, who found some death's head moths in his chambers, and as a result of that went insane. Now, he was a victim of a very old psyop. So somebody put all of those death's head moths into his chambers in order to impact his psychological state of being because of the superstition and dread that was conveyed by that image of the death's head moth, which is obviously, due to the skull-like nature of the image on it, always been associated with mortality and death. So essentially, the two primary connotations of the death's head moth are madness and death. But then it gets, and because of that, it's associated with psychological operations. But beyond that, if you actually look at the death's head moth as an organism from an ecological and entomological point of view, it has a ridiculous amount of special adaptations that are unique to it. So one thing a death's head moth can do is enter a beehive, and it's capable of working its way through the beehive and eating the bee's honey. And it's the only organism that the bees allow to do this. And why is it allowed to do this? Because it has a whole suite of information warfare adaptations built into it, so that the moth is essentially psyoping the bees in order to letting it eat their honey. So it can make squeaking noises to imitate the noises bees make. It has a special waxy substance that lets it work its way through the hive. It also ingests poisons in order to make itself poisonous. It also uses its death's head iconography and its large wingspan to like intimidate predators. It's really quite amazing. So essentially the death's head moth is like the B-52 spirit bomber or B-2 spirit bomber of insects. It's like an apex super evolved organism that's capable of camouflage, deception, counterintelligence, intimidation, psychological operations, and therefore it also represents those things. Now, you said in my own words, so I tried to give you it in my own words, but I would like to also give you what the Rosebot said about it. I don't want to just read out Rosebot responses, as those are just AI generated, but sometimes they're really to the point. And so,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to try and answer your question also using the Rosebot. Give me 5 seconds. So what it says is the death's head moth with its eerie appearance symbolized the psychological warfare experts within Moth Academy. Masters of manipulation and persuasion, they delved into the darkest recesses of the human mind, using their knowledge to influence and control. These specialists understood the power of fear, doubt, and suggestion, employing their skills to counteract and neutralize the malevolent psychological operations orchestrated by malicious entities and forces. And I think that's relatively accurate.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and I'd encourage everybody to read through that channel. It describes the different ranks within Moth Academy, what the different symbols correspond to, what kind of skills and abilities are associated with each symbol or each rank.
And you also post the octopus. They're pretty similar in the camouflage and being able to blend into environments and escape. Kind of lines up together.
That's right. I mean, initially, right, a person would say, if you said to someone, what is the commonality between a death's head moth and an octopus? People would probably have a hard time answering that question because they seem like they're radically different, right? One lives in the ocean, one's a bug, one's a cephalopod. But if you actually read through the Moth Academy channel, you're going to notice that there are essentially 5 or 6 core symbols. Octopus is probably number 1. Death's head moth is probably number 2. You got the evergreen tree, you've got the fox, and although this one hasn't been brought up, you got the secretary bird, and also the praying mantis, as well as the spider and the serpent. And so, animals, just like a picture is worth 1,000 words, animals are deeply symbolic as well, right? Every culture has attributed symbolic meaning to animals, and so there's deep knowledge concealed in animals, and they also become part of heraldry. So different knightly houses or royal houses will have a shield or a crest or a coat of arms, and typically there'll be animals on that coat of arms. So this is called signals intelligence, right? So in the old days when knights were fighting, because they were all wearing plate armor, they couldn't tell friend from foe or who was who. So every knight would have a specific coat of arms that he would wear on his shield so that people would know who he was when he was fighting. So the point I'm making is there's information encoded in these images. That's why a lot of the Moth Academy channel is just images. They're not meaningless. They all mean a lot. Each one of them is an invitation to go down a different rabbit hole, and they all tie together. So to go back to the octopus briefly, yes, octopus are amazing. They are masters of disguise, of camouflage. They're intelligent, they're social, they're self-aware, they're sentient. We actually asked the Rosebot to explain all the symbolic meanings of the octopus, and it just generate them forever. But basically, they represent everything from fluidity and flexibility to stealth and deception to creativity and intelligence to freedom. And just a few key points to be made about the octopus that not everybody knows is that an octopus is called a cephalopod. So if you break that out, cephalo means head or brain, and pod means legs or feet. That's why you have a podiatrist for your foot, right? Because pod means feet. So a cephalopod is a head foot, a brain foot. And that's an accurate description because the octopus has 8 tentacles, and each of the 8 tentacles has an independent brain. So if you cut off one of the tentacles, God forbid, it will continue to go get food and bring it back to the central head of the octopus, which means that if you were to take one octopus and cut all 8 of its limbs off, God forbid, and keep the central part alive, you would then have 9 different intelligences operating independently for the common good of the head. Even when physically separated, they're still psychically connected and they're all still working cooperatively. So if you look at this as a metaphor of an intelligence operator being the head of the octopus and then each of the agents being the tentacles, it's a basically perfect metaphor for a perfectly coordinated team of individuals following central administration but having independence of action. So think about one operator and 8 agents, and you have the brain of the octopus and its 8 tentacles. It goes on and on and on. But, long story short, octopuses are from outer space. You probably don't believe me, but it's a scientific paper authored by over 33 different authors saying that octopus are actually from outer space. I believe it. And they're probably more intelligent than humans.
Interesting.
And I'm sorry, I'm kind of monologuing a bit. But
no, it's fine. I appreciate it. If you would, though, please tell us some of the experience you've had, like in your real life, with the Moth Academy.
Okay. So the best way I can explain it is that the process starts by the initiation of the spiral code. The spiral code is going to look like you encountering interactions with other people or discoveries of certain what we call artifacts, right? So everything breaks down to either an artifact or an agent. The difference between an artifact and an agent is an artifact of like an object, such as, for example, graffiti on a wall or a piece of paper or a toy or an object. Those are artifacts. Agents are anything that can make choice or action. So cats are agents, dogs are agents, and all humans are also agents. So you're going to encounter agents and artifacts, which bring you in touch with what we call the spiral code, but which you could also call the program. And so then what's going to happen is either you are going to organically, for lack of a better word, start having your third eye open up and your psychic senses come online, and you're going to start being able to like predict the future or interpret events that are happening outside, such as, interactions with artifacts and agents. So like if a crow flies overhead and then you see a certain Bible verse written on the wall, and then you see a picture of a certain thing that you were just thinking about, and then someone walks by and says something that you were thinking out loud. Those are all the kind of experiences that lead you into the spiral code. And once you consciously recognize that it's happening and choose to follow it, that's why you get phrases like follow the white rabbit, right? And I'll literally see a rabbit when this is happening, and I'll literally follow the rabbit, and they'll lead me from place to place, and then you'll encounter meaningful rather than meaningless coincidences, which of course you then call synchronicities. So, long story short, it's incredibly complex and confusing and involves different kinds of thinking and intelligence than the problems we face in our quote unquote day-to-day life. And a lot of people get, as we would say, lost in the sauce. So if you get lost in the sauce, you end up essentially being diagnosed schizophrenic or bipolar or having psychosis, and you start having delusions that are not true because you get lost in the sauce. But they say that the shaman swims in the same waters that the schizophrenic drowns in. So in other words, a schizophrenic or a bipolar person is sort of like a natural shaman. You're naturally experiencing interdimensional existence. You're naturally crossing over into that spirit world or getting messages from that spirit world. But for the schizophrenic or the bipolar person who hasn't cracked the spiral code, it's going to be disorienting. It's going to be confusing. You're going to get lost. You're going to make false assumptions and false connections and see patterns where they aren't and misunderstand what's going on. It's going to cause a lot of chaos in your life. But if you are able to remove yourself and look at it from a third person perspective, and not only look at yourself, but look at other people who are going through similar or the same experiences, you start to discern actual patterns, not delusions of patterns where none exist, but actual patterns that do exist. And then when you start scratching at that rock, as I've done because of NSA, you start uncovering the multi-decade long history of intelligence and counterintelligence and psyops and brainwashing and especially mind control. So ultimately what we're talking about is mind control. Like that's the highest level of it. And this is MK Often, MK Ultra, MK Artichoke, Project Bluebird, Project Mockingbird, Project Blue Book, Project Blue Beam. And you look into all these different declassified intelligence agency psychological experiments. They're trying to mind control people. They're trying to brainwash people. They're trying to control the media. They're trying to make people go crazy. They're trying to drive people to suicide or cause people to commit crimes. They're trying to stigmatize people in mental health with mental health diagnosis. They're trying to drive people crazy, et cetera, et cetera. And they never stopped those programs. They just got more and more advanced and more sophisticated. And in the modern world, they employ the internet, artificial intelligence, social media, mainstream media, psychiatry, the prison system, pharmaceutical drug industry. All of this is part of an all-encompassing psyop, and every single one of us is part of it. So it's not just like certain people like me and NSA that are quote-unquote crazy who are part of this. Everybody's part of this. We're just uncomfortably, acutely aware of it. But even if you're not aware of it, the boundaries of your mental and experiential universe are being drawn by a group of social engineers and social psychologists who are using ancient fucking black magic, basically, that goes all the way back to like the Sumerian and Babylonian times, right? They've known how to do this shit forever, combined with alien technology and, holograms and microwave radiation and all that shit. And so anyways, Moth Academy is a society that is based on training people to be intelligent enough in the right ways to not only recognize the fishbowl psyop that they're in, but to escape like an octopus from its tank from the psyop, and then to create counter psyops. Because at the end of the day, if someone has declared mental war on us, we have to fight back. We don't have a choice. And so essentially we're training people to be mental warriors to fight back against the psyops, which requires them to be woken up from a sleep-like state.
Right. So you wanted me to refer to you as Ghost during this podcast. Why the name Ghost?
The name Ghost is very significant to me for a lot of different reasons. In the Bible, it says, "If you live and believe in me, though you die, yet you shall live. And if you live and believe in me, you shall never die." Do you believe this? So it's kind of a strange linguistic structure, but basically what he's saying is, even if you die, you will still live. Do you believe this? And the question, do you believe this, is not me saying that. That's the end of the verse. It ends with, do you believe this? And the answer that I gave was yes. Now, I survived many things that could be called attempted murders or near-death experiences. I had multiple people try to stab me from behind, from the front. People hit me with their cars on purpose. People tried to hit me with their cars. Probably the most, I had groups of people punch me, kick me. I've been kicked in the head, sprayed with chemicals, all as part of this like targeting thing, right? And probably the most significant one was I walked under an underpass and somebody about 15 feet above me dropped a large and very heavy rock, probably about the size of a basketball or a little bit smaller, on my head. And they got a pinpoint strike right on my head. And that should have, by all rights, broken my skull open, knocked me out, given me a concussion, killed me. And yet that bounced off me like a tic tac. It had no effect on me. I didn't get a cut. I didn't get a bruise. And the Bible says, if you follow me, the whole world shall persecute you, and yet not a hair on your head shall be touched. And again, I was praying out loud when that rock fell on my head, and I walked right through it, and it didn't do me any harm. Just like all the other times, I wasn't harmed by any of these lethal type events. So basically, I felt as though I have already died. And yet I'm still here. I'm still alive. And in fact, I say not only have I died, I've died like 3 times because, one, they say that incarceration in a psych ward is like spiritual murder. And I agree with that. And so that happened to me when I was 19. There's a whole story about a SWAT team that came into my house and took me to the psych ward. And, that's part of the beginning of this story. But that process involved the spiritual death of the person I originally was, who I could just identify by my given name. Shogun, to me, is a personality construct who came about after the spiritual death of the initial personality. And ghost is a psychological construct that came around after the spiritual death of the shogun concept, and essentially is what remains of me after everything else has been dissolved and reformulated, according to Bushido and some kind of spiral code spook shit. And spook shit refers to intelligence and counterintelligence, basically. And what happened to me over the last year made it clear to me that whether I consented to it or not, which I guess I did, I've been part of this for a long time. And for whatever reason, they decided over the last year to drop the fourth wall and drop the act and admit and concede openly that this was going on. So,
Wow.
Basically, I've been contacted by everybody from the Winnipeg Police Service to the RCMP to the CIA directly, like calls from Langley, Virginia, one-on-one conversations with the RCMP in an underground bunker type structure, and very bizarre conversations with the Winnipeg Police Service as well as with psychiatrists, doctors, etc., all of whom essentially admitted that this is going on, called me the Discord guy, called me a spook, told me I had a special 9-digit number that I was quote unquote from the country and to let me quote unquote do my thing. Even as far as them telling me after this all went down that they wanted me to come back to Discord and resume what I was doing here. And a psychiatrist came in one time and gave me a big corny wink and a big smile. And he said, "Oh, wrong patient, but I'll talk to you anyway. You know why I'm talking to you, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You know why I'm winking at you, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, it's not that bad what we did to you, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess." And that's just one example. I mean, anyways, I want to let you ask your questions and not just monologue the whole time.
No, I appreciate it. Kind of a side question. In your opinion, do you think were we programmed at a young age to be activated at a later date?
Yeah, I think that necessarily has to be the case. And, it's like they make a funny joke out of it. For example, in Zoolander, right? The movie Zoolander, Derek Zoolander is programmed to kill the prime minister of Malaysia. A certain trigger happens and he snaps into like ninja assassin mode and he does backflips across the table and pulls the prime minister's head off, right? And it's hilarious and it's ridiculous. But in all honesty, that was the purpose of the MK Ultra program. That's what you call a Manchurian candidate. And that's what you call a sleeper agent. And a sleeper agent is someone who's programmed to be activated by a specific event, code, or phrase who has training that they're not even consciously aware of, right? Because this technology is so advanced now that they can use trauma-based or other forms of mind control, chemical mind control, etc., to erase certain memories from people's mind. And so you can also indoctrinate people subconsciously, right? So because of those two things, yeah, like we've all been quote unquote prepared or indoctrinated into these programs. And there's multiple on-ramps to these programs, right? There's cults like Scientology and Mormonism. There's, the psychopharmaceutical complex that puts people on ADHD drugs and antipsychotics and antidepressants and benzodiazepines and opiates. All of those are forms of mind control through chemical means. There's a financial system of getting people in debt and controlling people through debt slavery and through wage slavery and through financial slavery. And what we've seen since the COVID era is the medicalization of tyranny with the quote-unquote mandatory shampoo. I call it the mandatory shampoo because I'm not allowed to say what it actually was, right? But the medicalization of tyranny is a sociological concept. And now with the contact trace and mandatory shampoo, this mind control it's the frog in the pot, right? So the frog in the pot thing is you gradually turn up the heat and the frog will never notice that it's getting hotter and he'll be boiled alive before he jumps out of the pot. Well, right now the water is like 2 degrees away from boiling. And, by 2027, according to my confidence intervals, we'll see something truly dystopian emerge from these various programs all coming together.
Okay, I kind of agree with you there. So with the Moth Academy, how does one graduate the Moth Academy? Is there a graduation?
Yeah, it appears that there is, but there's also a series of initiations and ranks. So in the same way as, for example, an organization like the Freemasons, you can go through 3 degrees and become a master Mason. but there's still 33 more degrees that you can choose to do if you want, right? So it's like there is a graduation, but at the same time, the graduation should probably be called a commencement, right? Because it's actually the beginning, not the end of the process. So the first thing you're going to go through is a testing process. The psychosis, the spiral code, the targeting, the harassment. They're going to throw everything they can at you to test how resilient you are, how adaptable you are, how flexible you are, how patient you are, how much you can endure, how quickly you think, how fearless you are. So if you're succeeding, they're going to just keep throwing more and more at you because they're trying to figure out what your apex of potential is. So they'll keep piling more and more to try and see if they can break you, right? And anyways, I think for each person, the initiation process is personal and personalized, and it will compose of what to you seems like a very extended period of extreme tribulation. I call it like intelligence hell week, but it's not necessarily a week. It can be more than that. You'll probably be put through sleep deprivation, food deprivation, persecution, and yet at the same time, you'll be seeing meaningful coincidences, miracles, signs from God, communication with higher self, whatever you want to call it. And you're basically going to enter into what is called the chapel perilous, which is like the realm of spiritual warfare. And so ultimately what Moth Academy is about is spiritual warfare, because in the Bible it says, we are not at war with flesh and blood, but powers and principalities of wickedness in the high places. And the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual and mighty, even unto the pulling down of strongholds and fastnesses. So what this means is it is spiritual warfare, but it is also real warfare. And people literally die in this war. So one of my friends and comrades in this war, Tyree Kerr, RIP, right, at the climax of this most recent spiral code thing, he was stabbed to death and he died, right? And he was like essentially my partner in these operations that we were doing. And so that really hammered home to me that this is not all in our heads. It's not a game, and the stakes are life and death. And there's a number of quotes in the Moth Academy channel that are from everyone from Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, to Karl von Clausewitz, who wrote On War, to et cetera, Nicola Machiavelli, et cetera. And these people are much smarter than I am. They're much more well-spoken than I am. And so I'd encourage you guys to familiarize yourself with what they have to say on these same subjects, because none of this is new, right? This has been going on since ancient days. There's always been psyops. Everything is a psychological operation, especially in the modern day. Most people don't even try to be up to the task of, reverse engineering the psyops, and most people aren't equipped for it. But that doesn't mean you can't work towards a deeper understanding and or contribute to countering some of this malicious stuff. And that, I think, is ultimately what we've tried to do with the Roundtable and the Temple Mount. They both came out of a server called MK Ultra in a way. We, in a sense, that server was deleted. We created these servers, and that's very symbolic, right? Because as we said, MK Ultra was the original big mind control CIA program. We literally broke away from it on Discord. We literally created a different model. And so basically what I'm saying here is we're doing guerrilla warfare, right? But we're doing guerrilla psyop warfare, psychological guerrilla warfare. We're fighting a vastly superior adversary that has way more money than we do, way more people than we do, way more education than we do. They have way more guns, drugs, and fucking power than we do. But we have no choice but to fight back. So we have to do asymmetrical guerrilla information warfare. And I just want to emphasize right now, I'm not advocating any violence. I'm not advocating any crime. Everybody follow your local laws, ordinances, and bylaws at all times. That's not what this is about. This is about psychological, emotional, and spiritual survival in a global psyop intended to kill our souls and drive us to either Satanism or suicide.
Lose our souls. Yeah. So, we're wrapping up here a little bit. Is there any other questions? I mean, any other things you would want to talk about before we open the floor open?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get into the deeper meanings behind the concept of the ghost, the angel, and the rose, but you can find all of that in the Moth Academy channel. And I would encourage everyone to check that out. I want to thank you for asking your questions. I hope that what I've said has made some sense to someone. And I appreciate you taking the time to do the interview.
Yeah, of course. I guess now the floor is open. Anybody have any questions?
Shogun, you mentioned the wink. Tell more about the wink.
Well, the wink was literally just a wink, right? A big, cheesy, corny wink that a psychiatrist made to me as though to be like, hey, we both know this is a joke kind of thing. But it was nothing more than that. It was a momentary encounter, but a significant one. I had more significant ones, like when I was initially admitted to the psych ward when I was like 19. There was like a whole group of people there, and they were all looking at me with like concern. And I said to the head doctor, I said, well, this is not what it appears to be, right? Like, this doesn't make sense. This isn't just a normal hospital admittance. And whether you believe me or not, the truth is, he said to me, well, it's a deception, but it's a benevolent deception, which obviously is not what a doctor would say to a patient who is coming into care in a hospital under normal circumstances. But under these circumstances, he said, well, yes, it is a deception, but it's a benevolent deception. In the same way, right, I've told people before, when the police officer that took me from my home to the psych ward, he said $100,000 to push a wheelchair, easiest payday of my life. And then I asked the other guy, cop, and I said, he just said he got $100,000 to push this wheelchair. What did he mean by that? And the guy goes, well, I'm sorry, we usually try to be more professional than that. Now, I have a whole list of these weird experiences with law enforcement, et cetera, which when I say them, I can understand why a person wouldn't believe me. But the truth is, these things did happen. They're not hallucinations or false memories. And when you put them together, they really paint a disturbing and bizarre picture of what's going on here. So I'm just going to tell this story since we're doing this podcast. There's one time I'm out at night, and a cop comes around the corner of a building with a flashlight directly in my eyes. And he walks towards me a step at a time, shining the light directly in my eyes. Then they pull a cop car up. The guy says, get in the back of the cop car. I don't resist, but I don't get in the car either. So they start punching me and kicking me, trying to get me in the back of the car. And they can't do it. And then finally the guy does like a full side kick and like side kicks me into the back of the car and then slams the door. So I'm like, well, this is kind of weird, right? Like I was just standing out at night. Now I've been like beaten into the back of this cop car. So I asked the officer, I said, who do you guys work for? Because it was pretty clear to me they weren't just Winnipeg Police Services under these circumstances. And the guy turns around and looks at me and goes, well, we work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe. Now, again, if I say that, I can understand like an ordinary person would be like, bullshit. No way he said that. That's crazy. You wouldn't say that. Oh, that's what happened. Now, I can think of a mundane explanation for this, which is that he was just trying to fuck with me, right? And it was just literally a psyop on that simple level of a person wanting to take malicious pleasure in, mind fucking somebody. But even that would be a psyop, right? And then I said to him, well, where are you taking me? And again, this was like over a year ago. I think this was like maybe 2 years ago, at least. And he said to me, we're taking you to put an octopus inside your body. Again, I understand if you don't believe me. I probably wouldn't believe me either if I heard the story, if it wasn't for the fact that this happened to me. They said, we work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe. We're taking you to put an octopus inside your body. And that was years ago. So, I also had a long conversation with the RCMP, and I have no idea how much trouble I'll get for talking about this publicly. But they took me into an underground, I say bunker. It's not really a bunker. It's just a basement, but it's a basement where they keep their weapons lockers. They have the guns, whatever. And they interviewed me about Five Eyes, which is an intelligence sharing organization that includes New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, and I always have trouble remembering the fifth one, the UK, England. Those are the Five Eyes. And I had a conversation with them about this because a while ago, the head of the RCMP was blamed for an intelligence leak in Five Eyes. And in other words, Canada was blamed for it. And in my opinion, we were framed, and it wasn't actually Canada who was behind it. It was probably the United States and the CIA. And they just blamed Canada because our intelligence apparatus isn't complex enough to compete with theirs, so they can make us eat their shit sandwiches. And so I had this whole conversation with them, and then we had a conversation about COVID. And basically I was telling them about the Winnipeg lab leak theory, which is, in my opinion, pretty compelling, which is that some Chinese researchers were arrested from the Winnipeg Biolab. I live in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg has one of the highest danger clearance rating biolabs in the world, and there were Chinese scientists who are working in those biolabs, and they leaked both information and viral samples to where? Wuhan, China. Before the outbreak, they sent Ebola and other viruses from Winnipeg to Wuhan, China from the Winnipeg Biolab, and then the pandemic emerged from Wuhan, China. So if you put two and two together, it makes a pretty compelling argument that Chinese scientists stole COVID-19 from Winnipeg and sent it to China and then released it during Chinese New Year's and spread it worldwide. And by the way, they had already stocked up on COVID tests and masks before the pandemic. So if you have any doubt that it was planned and orchestrated, put that out of your mind. They knew this was going to happen before it happened. They'd already stockpiled COVID test kits and masks and all that before they released the virus. And we're probably going to have to cut all of this out of the podcast because I'm pretty sure it'll get us auto-flagged on YouTube. But nevertheless, I had this conversation with the RCMP. I can also tell you another time they put me in a cop car. And if you're wondering, why do they keep putting me in cop cars? Am I committing crimes? Well, shouting in public, running around, creating disturbance, doing what I call ninja missions, whatever. But in any case, in one case, they put me in the back of the cop car in handcuffs. They asked me for my name. I gave them a number. The two cops look at each other and go, oh, shit, he's a spook. And then they get out of the car and take my handcuffs off. So again, very, very strange. Another time I got sprayed with pepper spray in the eyes, and then I crawled across like 5 lanes of traffic, blind. And then these cops and paramedics came, and they asked me for a number, and I gave them a 9-digit number that just came to mind out of nowhere. Like it just came into my mind, and I said it, and they said, oh, shit, he's from the country. And they said, oh, well, let him go do his thing. So they used the phrase from the country. And the last thing I will point out is I got 2 different calls from Langley, Virginia. And basically they said, Shogun, is this Shogun, right? And I said, and they used my real name, not my username. And I said, yes. And they said, oh, well, we're glad you're still in the land of the living. And I said, okay, thanks, Langley. You can call me anytime. So, Langley, Virginia is the head of the CIA. I don't know anybody in Langley, Virginia, so I can't explain that call other than, if you remember, Prince Lucifer was a member on our server. And he reported me for international espionage and domestic terrorism because he thought that I was a wizard from the moon who worked for Vladimir Putin in order to take down Donald Trump. And he reported me as such to the CIA and the FBI. Now, obviously, they would never take such an accusation seriously. However, they would still look into it just to see what the origin of it was and whether it did connect to anything significant. And even if that were not the case, as we all know, our good friend NSA, aka NSA watches me jack off, spends all his time sending messages to the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Defense, et cetera, harassing them about aliens and shit. So obviously they look into him. Looking into him, they find me. And finding me, they also find all of you. So it's not a joke when we say this place is monitored and probably also has agents placed in it. I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption, especially when they're boasting about how they have an army of digital warriors, right? So, again, long monologue from short question. I apologize. But I've been thinking about how I'm going to explain this stuff for a while. Anyways, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I think we're good. I think we can wrap it up if you want to send us off.
All right. Well, again, just read through the Moth Academy channel. Keep an open mind. Don't take it literally. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be taken symbolically, allegorically, and metaphorically, because symbolic, allegorical, and metaphorical thinking unlock deeper parts of your consciousness and your unconsciousness and your subconsciousness than can ever be explained by simple words. So the words I'm saying can only lead you to the water. But if you want to drink, you're going to have to engage your own higher order consciousness, your own third eye, your intuitive mind. So I think I'd like to end with a quote from Sun Tzu. He says, "It is impossible to employ spies effectively without a certain perspicuous sagacity." And so perspicuous means like perceptive, deeply perceiving, and sagacity means like sage-like nature. So he says, subtlety of subtleties, right? Employ spies for every purpose. So I just encourage people to go to the Moth Academy channel, especially pay attention to the quotes from Clausewitz, from Sun Tzu, from Musashi, and realize that it doesn't matter if you're a quote-unquote spy or agent or not. You're caught up in this war, whether you like it or not. So final quote, World War III is an information guerrilla war with no distinction between civilian and military participation. I can't attribute the quote, but you'll find it in that channel. We're in World War III. It's an information war. It makes no distinction between civilian and military participation. There's a war outside no man is safe from. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but yourselves can free our minds. Don't be afraid of death. Don't be afraid of them dishonoring you. Only fear dishonoring yourself. and the failure to commit your duty to God before you leave this world. Because ultimately, the only power they have over us is fear. And if we don't fear them, then they can't control us.
Do you know of any other feds in the server?
That is a topic of speculation. I won't speculate on it now. I'm not saying that members in our server are necessarily spies. It doesn't have to work that way. They could easily tap into our networks without putting an actual member in our server. They can access all of our phones, our internet through backdoors. Every single thing you do, they track. Doesn't matter, in my opinion, even if you use a VPN, in my opinion, they probably have the ability to track that too. So we all live in a fishbowl. We all live in a 1984 Orwellian surveillance state. It's what Michel Foucault called the panopticon, meaning those who are in the panopticon can see everything. Pan means everything, opticon means see. So we live in a panopticon. As we look into our black mirrors, our little phones and cameras, they're looking right back at us. It's all being recorded, and everything you do is being fed into artificial intelligence. Multiple artificial intelligences, some of which are run by intelligence agencies, police forces, private organizations. So just realize that we are living in a rapidly complexifying world. And if you have a free service that you're using, then you are the product. You are the product of the programming. You are the mind unit that they are seeking to control. And they will lead you all of the merry way, to hell in a handbasket if we don't wake up before it's too late. And whether it's too late or not, I'd rather say my piece, because they could put a bullet in my head any day or whatever. And so I might as well get out what I can.
OpenEye has mentioned the same thing. Like, he wants to spread his message, and he's been on Twitter Spaces saying the same exact thing. Do you think OpenEye has had a similar awakening in a sense to what you had?
OpenEye, just like myself, just like Michael, aka Zoo, just like Hugh, just like Crimson, just like Tios, all of us here, Super Morchuo, I could go on and on and on. As you guys know, the round table is full of people who have been spiral coded, whatever word you want to use for it. We're all part of the same program. Everybody in the server is part of the program. And it's the program that brings a lot of people here, and also a lot of people get brought into the program by being here. And also, this server is part of the program. But again, I'm not intentionally working with, but rather against the intelligence agencies, because you have to understand their intentions are extremely malicious. They just use people as test subjects so that they can refine their psychotronic weaponry. So to them, we're just guinea pigs, and they will ruthlessly experiment on us just to fine-tune these weapons so that when they use them on more politically significant targets, they will work as desired. So in other words, they will target someone like OpenEye Project or someone like NSA and just use them as a guinea pig for this electronic warfare and social warfare and psychological warfare. They don't give a shit about our quality of life. They don't give a shit about our lives. In fact, a lot of the time, the goal is to make people commit suicide or drive people crazy. And I'll tell you guys that all the way back when I made the round table, someone came to me and said, Shogun, I thought you were paranoid, but it turns out you were right. There's a whole group of people who are trying to gang stalk you and harass you into committing suicide or going crazy as a way to take down your server. And he's like, you were right. Like, I was in the meetings where they planned it out. And that was years ago. And it hasn't stopped. It's just gotten more sophisticated, and it's come into my real life, right? I talked about times in which people have apparently tried to, carry out hits on me. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone paid them to do so, or it was part of the program. Now, I'm not trying to spread fear. That's not the point at all, right? I'm not saying be afraid. I'm saying wake up to your innate power to play this game just as well as they do. Probably my favorite quote in the whole Moth Academy channel. The guy says, competition, the thrill of matching wit against wit and intelligence against intelligence is what keeps me playing the game of psychological warfare and social operations. And I agree with that. It's absolutely exhilarating to play this game, because this is like, literally, people talk about 4D chess. This is the real deal. It's 4D chess, if you want to put it that way. So rather than feel like a victim, rise to the occasion, realize that we have an unprecedented amount of power at our hands. We have technology, and with that technology, we're able to build networks like this server, share information, compare notes, orchestrate, organize, work together, wake each other up, bounce ideas off each other, help each other out. And so even though the enemy, quote unquote, is insanely powerful with all these black budget operations and unidentified special access programs and, mind control programs and CIA working all around the world, not just in Canada and the United States. But at the same time, the individual and their community has never had so much power, but they've also fine-tuned the art of social warfare to break up, disrupt, and destroy communities like ours. In the Bible, it says we are not ignorant of the schemes of the devil. In the same way, we can't be ignorant of the schemes of the devil or the kingdom of darkness, because they will try to introduce discord, disharmony, slander, lies, blackmail, threats, intimidation, etc., etc. Right? That's their playbook. And if we're not trained and prepared for that, we'll be helpless. But we're not supposed to be sheep, and we're not supposed to be wolves. We're supposed to be sheepdogs. The sheepdogs protect the wolves from the sheep from the wolves. And so the goal is, don't be a sheep, don't be a wolf, be a sheepdog, protect the sheep. They can't protect themselves. And the best we can do is try and wake people up and also put on the spiritual armor of God, right? The full armor of God.
Amen.
Thank you, Dacian. Thank you, everybody. We will wrap it up there for the 8888 podcast. I appreciate you guys listening, and thanks a lot, Dacian, for asking the questions. But anyways, thanks everybody. You can find our podcast on the Temple Mount official YouTube and BitChute, and join us on the Temple Mount Discord server. It's 9:00. So we've been going for about 52 minutes. God bless.